introduce yourself. It's been a bit since I've seen you, but let other people know who you are that maybe listen for the first time.
Yeah, I'm Josh Snowhorn. I'm the CEO and founder of Quantum Loophole. I race cars. I surf. I've been in the data center industry for 25 years now.
So it's been a bit since we hooked up. It's about a year since I seen you.
Probably, maybe longer.
Yeah.
2 years.
Maybe I feel like
a year and a half. I call it a year and a half.
You came to DCAC, didn't you?
DCC with Scott.
DCAC, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, DCAC. Sorry, not DCC.
Yeah.
That's Data Center Coalition.
Easy now.
Yeah.
No, but I saw you, but it's been a lot because, man, all I see is how busy you guys are, and I see a lot of stuff, and you're out there in the mud and the blood and the beer, and you're swinging through shit. So remember, I was like, hey, I knew you're the perfect person to include into this fold of series of podcasts that we have that are going to have a lot of the titans of industry and a lot of the legends that kind of are they're not all sunsetting, but I kind of look at this industry. How old do you think this industry is?
I mean, I started in 99, so, but I mean, I probably gave it another 6 or 7 years before that when it really started being data centers that were relevant to the internet. That they were commercialized, and you're starting to.
So we could agree that it's between 20 and 30 years old. Industry.
Yeah.
Probably closer in the middle, maybe 25 years.
I probably call it 30, really.
Okay.
Because then you've got
your network nerd shit that you're all about too. I know that you go high, wide, and deep on that side. That was way ahead of the space power and cooling changes that we're following.
Oh, cloud didn't exist. Hyperscale didn't exist. It was just, there was compute, but it was deployed as web hosting, not partitioning servers and selling those bits. I mean, Amazon created that. They had a bunch of spare compute because of their shopping season.
How about that?
That they sliced and diced and created the cloud.
So Oz is coming on this show. So he's going to come and obviously I have 1,000 questions regarding that because you were probably during the genesis. What's, Bilotti mentioned him on the last podcast too. Is it Madison or?
Joe Minrick?
No, there's another guy there that he's the Oracle of AWS. I've talked to a lot of people that have been there for a long time. Like this is the HMFIC that thought the whole thing through.
He's dead. Well, I mean, I think
Josh Madison or something.
The CEO of Amazon. I'm forgetting names. No, because I never dealt with that. But he ran AWS. He was there from the beginning. The guy who was originally, and Oz was there early. I don't know how early days, if it was day one, but certainly very early or maybe before it. I really don't know. But the guy I always dealt with was Joe Minrick, who's now the chief operating officer of DataBank.
Oh, okay.
But he was there forever. Joe was just eons. And so he would come to me and, they were only taking a couple 100 square feet in a cage. And that was a node of the cloud. And then all of a sudden,
normal volume back then.
Yeah. And then it was like an entire data hall. And then it was 10 megawatts. And now it's just, gigawatts and gigawatts of power.
And that's where you're at. And I'm really excited because when I first started this thing, you were one of the first concepts because what you're dealing with is something that's not ahead of the curve, but it's at the tip of the curve, right? Of where we're going as an industry. Mm-hmm. But what my message, my point was, I'm doing this series of podcasts with those that were here 25 years ago, let's just say during the genesis of this industry, right?
Yeah.
And so this industry is 25 years old. More than half of our industry has been in this industry for more than 20 years. And in the next year or two, we'll start seeing some serious sunsetting, the silver tsunami, they're calling it, right? All the people that have been in this industry for more than 20 years, like you. I've been in this industry for more than 20 years as well. And if you think about it, this is if it were the automotive industry, we would have been sitting here side by side watching Henry Ford and all of his peers build this automotive industry. But instead, we were watching, the Bilottis and the Peters and the Kavas and the Furlongs and whoever, the Oz's and all the other guys that you were probably up there in orbit, checking with them on the stuff that you were doing as well. But I'm patching them together to talk a lot about energy, right? And I'm using them to educate me more on energy so I could, to educate us all. I'm just the selfish guy instead of a microphone that uses the platform that says, hey, everybody's starving for this data. Same reason why we have DCAC. What you deal with is I'm not going to speak for you, but I've always tried to explain it to others that they ask me. The difference is I see you're a wholesaler to the wholesalers. You're master planning campuses that are master planned for a homogenous environment that could be, you could have all of FAMGA there plus 5 of the top operators and they could all be neighbors and you don't care. You're designing it for that scale and volume and velocity. Am I about right?
You're exactly right. Yeah.
Okay. So to that end, what's the number one constraint for everything in our industry right now?
That's power.
100%.
Hands down. Across the country.
Yeah. And to that end, like you have to be, in the same place that I'm at today, which is, holy shit, we need to know as much as we need to know about power. And for your sake, more than anybody else's, because you're offering a product that's predicated on a demand and a capacity to fulfill a large aggregate volume demand of power.
Yep.
How do you do that? You know, and so that's why I'm like, Josh, let's catch up, man. It's been a bit. We didn't talk prior to this because I'm like, we don't have to. You could tell me while we explain to the world, whoever's going to be listening to this, and this is codified and it's going to be locked in, because just like in 25 years ago when we were all here during the birth of this industry, now we're watching, you know, the first generation of those captains of industry begin sunsetting. We're still in this game for a bit, right?
Yep.
And there's some big changes that need to take place, and we need to address a lot of the things with power. So I want to address it with you to where, what are we doing? Because we're moving towards you guys are moving, the industry will move towards the path of how you're master planning these things, because we have no choice. Right. Power is going to force us. But at the same time, what are you seeing and what are you doing about it? And where's the pain? Is it coming, if it's some sort of constriction from regulatory authorities, or is it us? Is, you know, people not in my backyard bullshit, or like, and I know I just threw a bunch at you.
It's all that.
But I know you got it upstairs to probably pick up all this. So go with it. Unleash.
I'll give you, I'll put power in perspective of history here. So my claim to fame when I first started in this industry was building Napa the Americas, which at 750,000 square feet and 130 megawatts was the biggest data center in the world at the time.
Yeah.
That opened in June of 2001.
And where was it? It was like in Miami or something.
Downtown Miami. Yeah. Still there. It's now Verizon owned it, then Equinix now, and it handles, it's estimated 90 to 95% of all the traffic between North and South America goes through that building. So it's critical infrastructure. Really the last nascent net new giant scale internet exchange ever built in this country. So think about that, 750,000 square feet, 130 megawatts. And that was
how many carriers were in that building? Like cross connects could you get?
Oh God.
500, 250? I don't know.
How many carriers?
Yeah, I mean, I
have no idea at this point, because I've been out for so long.
It was ridiculous though, right? I'm sure it's probably one of the biggest carrier hotels.
Day one, it was 2. And I'm running around because dot-com bust happened. We opened our doors in the midst of the dot-com bust. Couldn't have been a worse situation.
Yeah.
We had a going concern on our stock because we were a public entity for, 3-4 years. It was terrible. I was running around in Anog and peering conferences and everything else saying, we're a tier 1 NAP, tier 1 internet exchange. It was like, say it enough and everybody will eventually believe it. We did have undersea cables that were aggregating there. I can tell you that when we were opening the doors, the leases that were supposed to be going to effect would have sold out the entire building. That was Global Crossing, Broadwing, Global Center. You start to get the gist of these companies that disappeared, right? And at the time, Miami was like the edge of the internet. It was a spur. People had some DS3s going down. You don't hear DS3s much anymore, but it was tiny stuff. Sprint, I remember when Sprint was relevant, turned up, something like 16 OC192s, which would have been unreal at the time, and they were gone instantly. And it was that was a reality check for them. They were putting their own big pop there and all these things. It organically, through I call it 100 hours a week of my personal work of just spewing, because I was good at that, and doing a lot of guerrilla marketing and just convincing people to interconnect there, and then it drove and built. But yeah, that's a story for that. Could go on and on.
That was maybe the question on cost.
But power is the big thing. So if you equate it to that, and then you look at what Quantum Loophole is doing up in Maryland, we're just 20 miles from Equinix Ashburn, so we're at the center of the internet. So that is where there's just unmitigated growth. Most of it's in Virginia. Maryland has its own issues. I'm happy to talk about that as much as I can.
Sure.
And we're getting through all that, luckily. But our single site is 2,164 acres. So it's 3.5 square miles in scale. It's bigger than the city of London. That's the size.
Okay, so that's the site you have. And I forget, last time you were on, what was that site prior to that?
It was an Alcoa aluminum smelter. So when you smelt aluminum, you have massive amounts of electricity to go through all the processes. It's a brownfield site, so it had cyanide, fluoride in its past, just in the middle of the campus where the smelter sat. That's already been mitigated and remediated, sure. But it still sat there. The crazy thing, and you could never even, you think about, we picked up this site. We went into contract in, I'm trying to think here, in around August of 2020. And now we're in 2024 now. If you just think about trying to pick up a site that had 230 kV lines on transmission poles dangling, waiting for somebody to build a substation, like it's just 20 miles from Equinix, like perfect situation. The reason we went full bore into Maryland and why nobody else had before is because Maryland had no data center tax incentives. A bunch of hyperscalers have been lobbying for it, spent a long time building that up. And we found out at about a month after it passed, and we're like, oh God, we're too late. We're never going to make it. We call up the economic development people. They're like, well, you can talk to Alcoa, but like 100 people have tried to buy that site and they just won't sell it to anybody. They want a lot of money, and they want a specific kind of entity that would be
a purpose for it.
Well, and they want somebody who's going to be a good steward. It could never be residential because of its past. It had to be something industrial. It had to be something that wouldn't be too impactful to the neighbors. They still want to be good stewards of the things that they left there. And they gave us a price. It's public. We paid $100 million for the property, which is $49,000 an acre, including ag and industrial. That site will probably generate $2 billion of revenue in the end at end state.
And it's 20 minutes from Northern Virginia, where
20 miles.
20 miles. Okay.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the roads, you got to go down and get around a bridge. It's a little longer that way.
But what's the price per acre? If you're going 50,000 where you're at, and it's
our contracts now are
millions of dollars just 20 minutes south of you. So
you'd be
prime real estate.
If you're like in Ashburn Core or even Leesburg, you're at $3-4 million an acre now. It's crazy, and you've got a power problem because Dominion has hot power lines. They can't get more electrons down those lines. Their 500 lines are hot. Most of Ashburn's on distribution, not even true transmission. And if that core transmission's hot, then what happens? Now, it's all a grid. It's Dominion connected to First Energy, which is our transmission provider, connected to this and that. And, that's the PJM marketplace, which is Pennsylvania. I forgot what the J is, and then Maryland. But anyway, so in interconnecting through that, we looked at that and said, okay, we have this smelter site with massive entitlement, former industrial site, power lines there, right next to a core substation called Daubs that has all kinds of new mass scale power in it and new stuff coming to it. It's like a hub for the entire region. It's First Energy's transmission system. Potomac Edison is their owned distribution, but we're right on transmission. Two different paths of multiple 230 lines with 500s 3 miles away. And we went through what's called a detailed load study with the utility. So you can go to any utility and say, hey, what do you have on those power lines? And be like, we don't know, so you have to fill out some paperwork, and then I'll give you a power kind of spot check. Sometimes,
to make sure, is that to make sure there's capacity available, or it's not oversubscribed?
Some kind of capacity. Just because you have power lines doesn't mean you can. If you were on Dominion and Ashburn, they're hot. You're not going to get a megawatt out of it. So first you do that, and then you try and get some assessment. That's usually a phone call, and they don't really know who you are, and it's probably maybe with or without an NDA. And then when you really engage, and this takes a long time, you do a detailed load study, and that's really analyzing and engineering and understanding interconnections, back-end power lines, everything else, not just what's on those, but what it would take to augment. And the wonderful thing with First Energy is because there was a former smelter site, massive scalability day one, but as it ramps up, we can do 2.5 to 3 gigawatts on that site. Now, we're here in the city of Austin. We both live here. City of Austin's energy production, 10th biggest city in the country, is 3,000 megawatts, 3 gigawatts for Austin Energy. So put that in context. We are equal to
the city of Austin,
the 10th biggest city in the country, in one little site. So what we're building is city scale infrastructure. Now, if you think about grid and you think about that comparison to my pass at 130 megawatts and 750,000 square feet, we have entitlement to do 14 to 28 million square feet of data center space on the site. Depends if you're 1 or 2 stories. It's all up to whoever builds it and what they want to do.
But 2's the limit?
2 stories is the limit, 60-foot building height without getting a variance. Gotcha. And those are hard to get. There's a lot of NIMBYism.
Especially in Maryland.
And especially anywhere. There's a lot of NIMBYism, unless you're in Texas, where we can do anything and it takes 90 days.
Sure.
But, it's a different state. That's why we live here, I think. But Maryland certainly is restrictive. There's a lot of history there. We have neighbors whose family have been there since the 1600s. Our campus has the manor house that belonged to the last living signer of the Declaration of Independence. It's called Carrollton Manor. Obviously, a historic site, sits right in the middle of our campus. So, and our CTO and CFO are living there because they are executing the project. So they're living in this. It probably has ghosts. I don't know, but that's
crazy.
That's the wild history there. So. Because of that, people are very embedded there for hundreds of years of generations. They're very protective of the farming. They're protective of the water. They're protective of everything. So luckily we already had entitlement and industrial land in the middle. From a power perspective, we look at a site because we're land, energy, water, and fiber. When I say water, it's cooling water to cool the data centers. So we facilitate that. We build all of that horizontal infrastructure. When we look at power, we look at what's available on the grid through these detailed load studies at any campus we're going to do anywhere. You have to isolate that. And you want transmission power. That's always a focus for us. We're never on distribution. So that would be at a minimum 138 kV all the way up, if you're on AEP system, all the way up to 765 kVs. That'd be the best. And not every utility will crack those. So, it all depends. There's a lot of factors to it. We look at something called peak grid. So what is the possibility that detailed load study carries for us? So we know we can do 2.5 to 3 gigawatts. There's going to be augments needed and all kinds of things. And in some case, to get to the full 3 gigawatts, there's 100 miles of back-end augments. But that takes time, and the utility has time to augment and reconductorize their lines to be newer so they can handle it and everything else. And they do that through FERC and NERC rules and with PJM cooperation, and because it's all a system. It's a meshed grid.
Are they asking you to build any of these things and then so they can buy them from you in the future? Or they're like, how fast can they move at the pace of what they want to? Or will you be able to build something that you need yourself and then give it to them?
No, it's never fast enough. But I'll get into that. So the things we funded first is a substation for First Energy or Potomac Edison, their distribution entity. Massive gigawatt scale day one substation. There's multiple substations that'll be phased in around the site. And that takes a long time for permitting. You still have to go before the planning commission. Even the utility does. When we were going through planning commission, one of the commissioners delayed because they had concerns around noise from a 230 to 34 step down transformer. I'm like, what noise? And because it was an off-kilter question that nobody ever asked because they deploy these all the time, it
delayed everything.
It caused about 6-week delay and stress. Everything about what we do is unprecedented and stressful. A 230 kV transformer sounds like your dishwasher. Like that's the amount of dB. But it had to be proven. The commissioner wouldn't approve it until it was proven. And that's fine. That's their prerogative to do that. So everything is unfamiliar and at a scale that's unprecedented. Now, once you get to peak grid, where do you go? What happens? So is peak grid 3,000 megawatts because that's what the detailed load study is, or will that be augmented, let's say, to 5,000 megawatts or something like that? And again, it's mind-boggling scale of what we do to power our clients who need it on the campus. And they really need it. It's not a joke. It's, we have three-way NDAs with our clients and the utility, and they're, if there's any doubt, once they see who our clients are and they get in front of them, they're, the shock and awe hits them. And then huge teams dedicated to this. First Energy talks about us in their earnings reports and what it's going to mean. You can imagine the single biggest consumer of power in a single site anywhere in the country is going to be our campus today. Now, there might be others.
That'll do this. Maybe you doing it somewhere else, right?
We are. Yeah, we're looking hard in Texas. We're looking hard in Illinois. We're looking hard in California. But our eye on the ball is executing the biggest project ever created in this industry that's rapidly coming to fruition that has been immensely difficult. So keep the team focused on that. Everybody's working on other things at the same time, but we never take our eye off the ball on that. Now, how do I get beyond peak grid? When I talk about grid, that's power lines, coming from afar. Where is that power coming from? If it's coming from West Virginia, you can guess it's mostly coal or maybe some gas turbines. It could be coming from a nuclear plant that's in Maryland. It could be coming from a nuclear plant up in Pennsylvania. We're literally ambivalent, and you can't actually choose your electron. You can buy power purchase agreements from some generator. First Energy is purely wires. They're just transmission. Maryland legally decoupled that, and that is First Energy's business. They do like 3 gigawatts of production, but that's like nothing. The biggest nuclear provider in the country is Constellation. I think they do maybe almost 50 gigawatts of nuclear in the country. So just to give you a recipe of scale. So when we look at it now, how are we going to get beyond that? It might be we're not a power plant operator, but as a as a facilitator of the easy button of this infrastructure. We acquire the land, entitle it. We do that very boring work of underground sewage, potable and non-potable water. So
the long-term infrastructure.
Right. So we deal, and it's funny because we're dealing with sewage and we deal with non-potable water, which is really treated poo water. So we have poo and poo is, one of our big focuses. We got to do it. That's not glamorous, but it's what we got to do. We have underground duct banks all around the campus we have to build to interconnect everything. And that's mind-bending to think about how you're going to create that. Power distribution from substation to property, and how do you cross creeks and bore this and do that? And we're trying to do a dig once approach. We're 5 stories below the ground with very complicated secant piles to prevent water issues because of the history of the property, to get the sewage lift station and pumps 5 stories down to make sure that all the flows go into the right thing. So we're basically doing the county's sewage infrastructure work for a city scale campus. We're building a city.
Yeah.
All those things are incredibly complicated. Now, the next step for us in the energy world is looking at things like batteries and how can we maybe potentially, and the technology is just not there yet, but in the future, when
talking about a microgrid solution with a better battery solution.
Yeah, Mike, there's different versions of microgrid. There could be a microgrid where you put in a giant gas turbine plant in the middle of your facility. You put in a nuclear reactor in your facility. We're not doing
SMR. You're talking about
SMRs. I go way deep on nuclear with you. Yeah, because I am super nerded on power now because I have to be.
Right.
As is Scott and what we think of as a team. But any kind of power production that you can either generate with sun, but it's going to take thousands and thousands of acres to accommodate our needs. And guess what? The sun doesn't always shine. Battery technology at the scale that we need. You have lithium ion, but they're expensive and you can't really scale. A gigawatt of lithium ion would be, I don't even know. I haven't even mathed it. It's mind boggling. You can actually go on Tesla's site and I haven't done it, but you can click and pump up the numbers and they'll tell you it'll be like $750 million or $1 billion just for the batteries, or it's crazy.
For real.
Right? Yeah, just buy them straight up. And they only last, and you can click the hours, 2 to 3 to 4 hours. And of course the numbers go crazy when you start going to 4 hours because it's exponentially more batteries. Where the technology is going to go on batteries is going to be like vanadium flow batteries, iron flow batteries. These are batteries where you have a lithium ion battery at the front end that has a very fast response to meet the Sabima curve requirements of a server so it doesn't go down, connected to the same inverter with a long duration battery farm behind it. This is lab-based, being invested in. Factories are being built to try and develop this thing. Form Energy is one that we're close to because they're part of the TPG family of investments, our capital partner. So we've talked extensively with them. Their new factory is going to be in West Virginia at an old industrial site, very close to us. So it'll be very interesting to see where that goes. So when the technology catches up, it could be solid state. I don't know.
Hold on, but you were describing a scenario in which you'd have a single battery set that took the initial inrush current strike or hit
for 10 minutes.
Yep, yeah. and then that was basically shielding the primary battery bank. In addition to that, and that's another application or technology model that we're exploring. I'm following that because I've heard everything from compressed air, massive. Oh yeah, you've heard it all. I'm sure too.
I've researched every single thing. So the iron flow batteries are designed to be 100-hour battery farms. They use the rusting process in solutions to create electrolysis, which creates electricity and dissipates that, so it can store it within the fluids and the rusting of the metal. And of course, you can use waste iron. It's all kinds of things. Pretty wild. And the technology works, but here's the problem. It takes at least 10 minutes to create that, which means you have to have this front end poppy battery that's and think about a gigawatt, let's say, of lithium ion, even at 10 minutes is a lot of money. It has risks associated with it. So when do you implement a battery system like that? Do you wait until solid state really, really kicks in and comes and economically becomes either the same or cheaper? Do you look at and when you look at these batteries, iron flows are great because it's taking you can use slag materials and all kinds. It's pretty wild what you can use with it. Lithium, we all know the supply chain of lithium is pretty shocking when you think about where it's mined, the graphite and all the different things that have to go into it, the ships that transport it, the trucks that move it, the manufacturing process, the dendrites that can form within lithium batteries. There's all kinds of issues and risks around it and everything else.
So I fucked you up because you were talking about reactors, or we were going nuclear.
Oh, I can go nuclear.
Okay, we'll get there. I want to hear both. No, yeah. I want you to unpackage it all. That's why I was like.
I'll do this lockstep. So as we go, so phase one, if you're thinking about it, we're gonna crack that definitely. And phase one, is building transmission scale substations, delivering this power to our clients, and letting them contract with the utility, because we're just funding the substation, and the customers reimburse us for it with a margin.
So hold on. So you're the buying at the aggregate wholesale side. That way you don't become a utility.
No, we can't do that because of regulatory issues from the grid. We can't take.
You can't turn it and do like an all-in number, I guess, on a wholesale basis.
Not off the grid. No, that we can't do that. We can't take, like, if it's 5 cents a kilowatt hour, for example, and we go buy a PPA from somebody.
Yeah.
We can't flip it and mark it up
because you can't make money off it.
Yeah, it's just not legal.
Heavily
it's
regulated.
A regulatory issue. Yeah. So that's taking the grid's power. That's the limitations of the grid. But where we can make money is reimbursement. We mark that up. So what nobody complains about, because we've taken the capital risk to deploy a lot of money. Building gigawatt substation is a lot of money, and then a margin around it. So everybody's happy and they deliver it, and there's nobody's going to complain about that. And we're not greedy. We're a wholesaler to the wholesaler, so it's all
sure.
We keep our margins clean, and it's open book, so they know exactly what we spent, so they know what they're paying for. So but it's going to be years to get to peak grid, and it gives us time to work on these solutions around batteries, and that's a good thing because everything will catch up to it. Now, in a battery scenario where I build 1,000 megawatts of batteries, a gigawatt of battery, which has never been done anywhere in the world, hands down, never, right? Just to put this in a precedent side.
So unsafe, right?
And then you think, if it's lithium, yeah, it can be. So, and if you think about it from the scale of my site, well, if I want to back up the entire site, what's that going to be? It would take about 300 acres to do an iron flow combined lithium battery farm extremely densely, and to be able to supply a gigawatt. And 300 acres of industrial land, well, that's pretty valuable, right? So you have to think about what kind of land you're using to do that. Just as a rough example, maybe technology will densify, maybe it'll get better. I'm just talking about what's there today. So as we're researching these things, we're trying to think about what path we want to take. We haven't made any decisions. We haven't purchased anything. We talk to everybody. They're all eager to talk with us because of what it represents. That'll be our next phase of power. And we'll deliver that so that we can do things like grid arbitrage for clients. That means we can connect that to the grid, and we can do what's called peak shaving. So take off the 4 peaks a year and cut costs for them. We can ingest purchased, and at that point we are a purchaser. We can ingest purchased PPAs of solar and wind or hydro or whatever else. So those electrons, while it's difficult to guarantee where that electron exactly came from, unless you could tag it, which can't do, or unless it's right next to us and we're tethered right in. But that's what we'll buy to ingest into that. So one other thing we could do is that when our customers are like, hey, I'm whoever I'm buying power from is down, and that means that essentially I'll be fed from a coal plant. I'd rather purchase, for the next 24 hours, your green power that's sitting in those batteries to augment something like that. Or we prove that the system is reliable, and then we say, well, why do you have generators? You don't need to do that anymore. Why would you spend all that money?
You remove that from the next
And then
phase.
The fuel issues, and I'll go into all the issues around generators in a second. It could be diesel or HVO or natural gas gens or whatever it might be. And that's an option. Unfortunately, even though everybody wants it to happen and wants to will it to happen, and legislatively people are pushing for that, the technology isn't quite there yet. The best thing in our industry is that our customers, the hyperscalers, are the greenest companies in the world. They can afford it, and they're putting their money where their mouth is. So technology will rapidly ascend, but there's no definitive date, and there is no ultimate solution to prove that out. Once we get beyond batteries and we're at peak grid and we're providing a green solution for our clients, where do you go? There's options around production. Now, we don't anticipate production on our campus, meaning we become a power plant, more than anything because it's probably not going to be tolerated in Maryland. Now, if we go to other state, it wouldn't be tolerated probably in California. You can imagine how, the difficulties around approval in California. It's probably a decade of work to create the kind of things, the scale of what we want to do. Illinois, possible. Texas, very possible. Now you have to be outside of the non-attainment areas because there's some emissions restrictions in some of the bigger cities. But if you do that right and interconnected, you have the possibility of doing all kinds of different things around that. Now, what would generation be? Here's the reality of we'll go into nuclear now. When you talk about a small modular reactor, what that means, aside from technology, is a scale size. Generally, it's 50 megawatts. A medium modular reactor might be up to 500 megawatts. A normal big reactor would be like a Westinghouse 1000, 1,000 megawatt reactor. The Vogtle reactor is built by the Southern Company in Georgia. There's 2 of them. They're modular in their design, that they're 50% less parts than the previous reactors that they're built right next to. They built 2 of them. Took them 18 years, $34 billion. 80% of that funded by the Department of Energy, insanely over budget. And now they had some vibrations to harmonics in the pump systems, and they haven't even quite turned them up for full energy production yet. Correlate this to Georgia. Georgia in the last 100 years has ramped up to 15 gigawatts of power across the state, right?
What drove that?
100 years of growth, just industrial growth in the city and everything
Healthy,
else.
though. They did it right.
15 gigawatts. The demand request on the utilities in Georgia right now from today, 2024 till 2027, is an additional 17 gigawatts. Now, it took 18 years to build 2 gigawatts in a reactor. So you can see where the reactor problem comes in. And this is the only reactor currently built for production anywhere underway in North America at scale. A small modular reactor like NuScale, for example, believe they're 76 or 78 megawatts. Let's just call them 70-something megawatts. They are the first new design approved by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and gone through all the process and have been anointed. They're testing in Idaho now. I believe it's Idaho. Might have got that wrong. Might be Wyoming, but the 2 states next to each other, so it's helpful in that region. They're testing. They had a bunch of contracts. A lot of those contracts have fallen through because their costs have doubled already. NuScale's reactor is simply a pressurized water reactor with much less parts, much more efficiently made, but it's just a pressurized water reactor, just like a Rolls-Royce reactor or a GE Hitachi reactor, just like a Westinghouse reactor, a traditional reactor. They're just traditional. It's just smaller. If you think about that, and that they still have years of testing and their pricing is already doubled, it starts to show you some of the problems that come into building nuclear. All that being said, I absolutely think it's the future, and
there we go.
We will be putting our money where our mouth is and signing agreements to take on nuclear power, but somebody else has to do it. We're not in the business of doing that. So, being agnostic to reactor technology, looking at boiling water, pressurized water reactors. There are pebble bed reactors starting to be built in China and other places. That takes a sphere of ceramic material instead of rods and has the uranium-238 inside of it. They're safer theoretically, but they're just starting to come to fruition. Everything in nuclear takes a long time. There's things like fast reactors where you take spent fuel. There was testing done in the 1960s. I think a company called UCLA I might have gotten this wrong. I'm butchering their name.
In the 60s?
No. The government did in the 60s in a test reactor, and there's a company, I believe, called UCLA, but I might be butchering this name. I've talked to so many, I'm losing track. And there's actually a company here in Austin called Alo, not like Alo the yoga stuff, but AALO. And the CEO's here, but he's doing something called the Merlin reactor, which is a very, very small reactor, like a 10 megawatt reactor that's being tested in maybe Lawrence Livermore or something like that, or Sandia. I don't know.
What would that application be? Residential?
His goal is doing multiples of them. So, you have 50, you have 5 of them, it's 50 megawatts. You got 10 of them.
Seems like it's a small pocketed one, though. You could probably make that look like it's in a shed or a house of its own, and it's not going to be as conspicuous.
Yeah,
right?
But we're going to put it in your backyard. How do you feel about that?
I'd be fine with that.
You're military, so
I grew up on a submarine.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I know that it's the most reliable, most safest, and most scalable form of energy that we can get our hands on.
Absolutely.
And I think that everybody that doesn't know shit about nuclear needs to watch Nuclear Now. It's have you seen that movie? Oliver Stone brought it out like last year.
Yeah,
but he does a great you don't have to be an Oliver Stone fan, and you don't have to get political with it. But it's hard to not capture his intent in that movie, which was to bifurcate the difference between nuclear weapons and nuclear energy. And I think a lot of the people that were against nuclear energy were really just more against nuclear weapons, and on accident they killed both.
Right.
And that is the greatest thing that we have to do, because I think the greatest, like when Christian and I were talking, I took him to go see Rogan last night, and we were, sitting down shooting the shit in the middle, and I was like, I do think, he asked me, because you know him, he's a big picture, big blue sky.
He is, absolutely.
Visionary, inspiring person.
Yep.
And after poking me enough, he's like, what are you trying to actually accomplish? And I was like, listen, man, I'm just so stupid that I think that this industry, which is the greatest industry ever, right? And it grows greater and faster than every other industry because of the growth of every other industry. Every industry's adoption rate of technology, regarding of how fast it emerges, it all falls back into what you and I do for a living.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
People don't realize this, but this is like, I was told porn was recession proof. I'm thinking that this is recession proof because porn is recession proof. You get what I'm saying? It's still online.
Terramark survived. I'm not joking. In
Right.
the dot-com bust on porn and spammers, and you know what? They paid their bills. It was like filled it up with that, and then they all left. But that's how we
the reality is technology is everything,
Yeah.
and this industry is because it is 25 years old. It's not mainstream yet, right? And because it's not mainstream, we're going to continue to deal with a problem that a more mature, more sophisticated vertical of industry. If you were in the legal industry or the healthcare industry or medical industry, they have ethics that they have is at the forefront of their profession, so they don't have to wonder what all the unintended consequences are going to be. Now, obviously, there will be some that they can't expect, but we in this industry are still making messes as we go. There's the soup's never done cooking, so it's hard to optimize a system that you haven't even standardized on because you can't even stabilize it yet.
We can't even keep up with it.
That's what I'm saying. And
now you've got the crazy AI boom doing the same thing. I mean, unreal, frenetic pace.
AI won't go anywhere. That's what I'm saying. But you and I both know at some point, people don't get it. Like, we're at an existential crisis on labor and power. Yeah. And that's what this platform is for. Is I'm like, listen, and that's why I'm asking these amazing, the luminaries of this industry to come in and be like, hey, I don't think people are listening. So the chorus is what sings louder than the soloist. So I wanted to get a whole steady thread of people on here that are like, hey, you need to be paying attention week over week over week over week. And that's how we create the omnipresence of awareness of what power is going to be, because just like the innovation of technology, it moves twice at the speed of the human evolution of biology. Biological evolution is lagging, and our ability to create solutions for power are lagging because of us. Innovation and technology get advanced 10 times faster than us, but we will hold this whole thing back.
Well, look at the problem of nuclear. Because there has to be something to fill the gap in between that.
You're talking about a guy that is a big advocate for it, right?
We can all be advocates. So if you and I right now today, we're like, we're going to do it, and you and I said, you've got 10 billion and I've got 10 billion. It's probably what it's going to take to build something, and then we try and cite it. Well, God, where are we going to put it? Because I don't care what you do or how good it is. Listen. No, this is reality, though. This is reality. You had COP28, where all the governments in the world came together after the Middle East fought and said, no, it's oil and gas. But of course, in reality, it doesn't work for the environment. And they said they're going to triple nuclear. So how do you actually execute that? In particular, I'm going to focus on the U.S. because the market I care about is where I'm doing business. How do we execute it here in a regulatory environment that makes it insanely difficult? In the best case, if you and I both pumped in $10 billion each personally, you're ready to write a check? So we put that in place, right? And we go with an existing reactor technology that is certified. That's the key. So that means it's not a
concept or a theoretical one. This is one that's been applied. It's got metrics that we can measure.
Yeah. So let's call it Westinghouse 300 reactor, or soon there's the Rolls-Royce reactors. Rolls-Royce has 68 active reactors in the world with never an accident. It's great. They're 482 megawatts each. So that'd be kind of the size to be medium modular, really to make sense for our industry because of the kind of scale. Today, if we went with a fully approved reactor, right, it would be at least 10 years, at least.
Yeah, I agree.
To bring it to life. So now we look at the existential problem of power. I mentioned Georgia before, and this demand that it is impossible to fulfill. How do you deal with the stopgap in between it all? You also have, and you just saw it bubbling up in the last week now, the administration is now like, wait, Bitcoin's bad. Because the price went crazy, right? And then the DOE and everybody else started reporting, and the grid, FERC, and everybody else started reporting, hey, they're doing, Bitcoin specific mining is taking up probably 3% of the grid. Now I think there's going to be, I don't do business with Bitcoin guys. That's great. I believe in blockchain. I'm not a big fan of Bitcoin. It's just a personal thing, but blockchain's amazing. Great technology. We'll be buying real estate with you and I'll touch our phones together and we'll transact a house or something. I mean, that's going to come. But it's going to be really interesting to see if all of a sudden the Bitcoin miners are like, hey, you got to shut down. Go somewhere else. We don't want you here. Now, where are you going to go? You go to Asia. I think there's a new coal plant a week being turned up in Asia right now.
For real.
Oh, yeah. Our coal all of our plants are shutting down. But in, where you have a huge percent of the population between India and China, they're building them like crazy. And they're like, we're not going to stop. We have booming economies. We need to achieve these things. And the only way to do that is coal. But what we're doing is exporting our coal there. So we're, the climate issues, we all forget we're on one planet and the things that go along with it. But we want what we want. We want our phones to work. We want the internet to work. Be it a porn or be it a business or whatever it might be, it's all got to work, right? We need everything to function. Our entire economy relies on that. Now you've got this bursting up of AI. It's a little bubbly. A lot of people pouring a lot of money into a lot of gigawatts of stuff. And I think that if you don't stick to your fundamentals of energy, water, fiber, and land, and you start building to accommodate very specifically around that, and you aren't really looking at the business plans behind that, like is everybody really making money with AI? Are all the billions being pumped in to accommodate that? I say this because I've lived through cycle after cycle after cycle, and if you just stay the course of core infrastructure, it's needed no matter
network connectivity.
It's needed no matter what you do. And then if you start chasing very specific demand sets, if I said my campus was a Bitcoin campus and we sold to a bunch of Bitcoiners, and then the administration pulls the plug on Bitcoin, that who knows? You remember the metaverse?
Sure.
Meta's still losing billions on the metaverse. That metaverse got quiet all of a sudden, right? You stopped hearing about it. Do you remember TikTok and the last administration's goal to force TikTok to then and ByteDance to deploy all their infrastructure in the U.S.? That was behind Oracle and ByteDance themselves doing their own stuff. Huge surge, took up all the spare capacity along with Meta's metaverse, but you don't hear about that anymore. That's poof, gone. Now it's all about AI taking up everybody's spare capacity, which was gone already, and then some, and pre-signing for stuff. I don't know what's going to come next. These are just waves, and
I don't know what the fad is. I don't know. You're right. You're spot on those, like how the cycles are up and down in terms of what is consistent and inconsistent. But over the course of time, if you track every industrial revolution to now, the first industrial revolution gave us steam power. The second gave us electricity as well as the motor car. The third gave us nuclear power, which we developed actually in a 55-year gap. There was a 55-year gap between the second and the third industrial revolution. Mm-hmm. In that gap, we had 4 wars. We had World War I, then we had Prohibition, mm-hmm. then we had the Great Depression, and then we had World War II, and then we had Korea, and then Vietnam. So there's a less of an industrial revolution during those really, really downtrodden times where we have major wars. But when we came back to it, we had another form of energy, which was nuclear, and then we had a lot of issues with nuclear. But nuclear was mainstream for a bit there, right? Mm-hmm. And then in the fourth industrial revolution, we did get more power. We just got it from quantum computing, and we got it from AI and AR and VR and all the other cool things that come with that.
We're in a technology revolution now.
We sure as shit are. It started at the end of COVID, so in 2020, we really started the fifth industrial revolution. And what you and I are talking about is proof of what it is. And that's where we have a more harmonious relationship with the technology in our life and the machines in our lives, because the unintended consequences of those previous ones, like you said, are gross pollution, right? And I remember reading a paper when I was in college where it was the CTO of China, and he goes, how do you feel about the CTO of like Dell saying, yeah, we outsource all of our manufacturing to China? He goes, that's just what the Americans think. We outsource all of our marketing to America. We're an industrial, country that's built on building things. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? But the optics are changing based on which way you view it, right? For us, we've gotten power in every industrial revolution. I think what I believe is going to happen in this fifth industrial revolution is AI and the demand for it. Like you said, it's bubbly, but it's prevalent and it isn't going anywhere. And you talk to anybody and they're going to tell you that it's going to be 10x of what cloud demand was. And we don't even have enough power to support cloud demand today.
More than 10x.
Let's just say conservatively.
There's 60 to 100 gigawatts. And it's funny when I talk to luminaries of our industry, more business people, luminaries, not nerds, but
sure.
The business side, they're like, I don't believe it. 8 out of 10. I'm not joking. They're like, it's not really true. That's all, and then yet we're seeing companies saying, I'm spending $60 billion this year on it. I'm spending this and that. And I forgot what somebody just reported $34 billion. It's crazy numbers.
The missing part though, but you were almost onto it when you're asking me if I had my 10 billion and you had your 10 billion, but it doesn't take you or me. I think one, the adoption rate of emerging technologies will never slow down, but the pent-up demand for more will only put more constraint on the very highly constrained power solution that exists not only for our industry, but for other commercial or industrial industries that need power as well. And I think that pain is going to force us to invest in the long game for the first time. That 10-year cycle where we're not getting anything returned back on our investment, but these infrastructure real estate asset groups are going to start investing into these 13, 15-year, returns instead of
60-year returns on
whatever.
nuclear.
But it's going to be there for 60 years because you're going to refuel it twice, right? So they're like, okay, this is what's going to happen is everybody has to slow down. The fifth industrial revolution is about slowing it down. So figure out how we can measure. We have to take this industry and make it more mainstream. The mission critical industry cannot be a stepchild industry. It needs to be more mainstream, not only so that we could draw in more talent and get your kids and my kids will be in this industry. And if not, then they're going to be working for a business that's in the orbit of the ecosystem of this industry because everything ties back to technology.
I think it's actually mainstream more than you realize. And I think that every state and every municipality wants it.
Virginia's mainstream.
Virginia's super mainstream, but Virginia has become too much of a good thing. So the NIMBYism that exists in Virginia is spreading like wildfire across communities.
Interesting.
And it's making intensely difficult. People drive by and they're like, we don't want these smoking warehouses. They have chilled water systems in cold weather and it smokes, but they think it's smoke. Or there's a hum from the chillers, or there's the diesel generators, all of a sudden there's 100 generators all firing up and putting out smoke. Even if it's only 8 hours a year, people are still concerned with it. It's interesting to see it in Loudoun County, which is the wealthiest county in the country. Is it wealthy because folks live there? No, it's wealthy because of this technology innovation that's happened and centered around there. That is absolutely the catalyst and engine, has kept their taxes low, has brought in very high paying jobs, pumps money into that economy. Yet you're seeing extreme resistance. The Compass QTS campus down in Prince William, it's next to Manassas National Battlefield. That's complicated. It was approved with a lame duck county commission to actually convert that land. It is. I think it's going to be embedded in lawsuits for years, and you've got everybody suing everybody because they don't want it. It's right along the transmission lines, the hot ones, but those are due to be enhanced. So they're playing the long game of time to develop it. Many million square feet. It's about 2,000 acres, a little bit smaller than ours. 1,900, 2,000, and it's two entities doing it. And then you have the same situation with data centers spreading south in Virginia, and these rural counties are fighting it. They're suing, they're turning them down. It's just problems galore. So it's a mainstream, mature industry that's always constantly on the edge of technological change and facing resistance from the communities that they actually do great things for, like. If you have a data center campus, you do millions of square feet. You don't need a lot of roads other than during the construction time. Your traffic counts are very low. Your impact to schools, which are the biggest funding issue for anybody anywhere, are very low because you don't have that many people. These buildings that provide incredible tax revenue don't actually need that underlying normal community support infrastructure like roads and schools.
But maybe that's what Quantum Loophole 2.0 needs to be, is where you do include schools and you do include living capacity. Like you're creating an urban city out of nowhere, right?
1.0 does that right now. So we work with the community.
People can live there.
Oh, so we'll generate about 1,500 jobs across this giant campus. The community will easily support that. The same kind of infrastructure if it was a warehouse, just a warehouse, which is perfectly entitled to do with its zoning, millions of square feet of warehouses, huge billions of dollars of road infrastructure.
I had no idea. That's awesome.
All that stuff would have to be produced. You'd have to do billions of dollars of schools to support all of the workers who work in the warehouse and the trucks that come in and out. The roads would be damaged, the noise, the dangers, all that stuff. With us, 1,500 jobs, very little road. We do roundabouts. There's very little road enhancements needed. We're paying for all the sewage and all the infrastructure. The county doesn't have to pay for that. That enhances and supports and connects to their system. We cool our data centers with treated sewage wastewater that goes in the Potomac River every day, millions of gallons of cooling water. So we don't use potable drinking water for cooling the data centers. All those things coming into play. So it's extremely good yet. And there's studies done around this. Maryland Technology Council did a SAGE report, incredible impact. It's probably very conservative and it was still an incredible impact economically to the county with very low impact to that infrastructure. So that's data centers overall, as long as they're done right. the power issue is where it all comes back down to, and land use are affecting things. Let's say today I build a gigawatt campus and I said, I'm going to 100% support this campus with solar. First of all, it's impossible because the batteries, we already discussed that, can't happen. And it would take, how many acres do you think to do that?
I don't know, probably half a state.
Not that much, but it would take 6,000 to 8,000 acres of farmland generally, right? Because if you're going to,
it's out in the middle of nowhere.
Or forest. Okay, let's cut down a forest. Or is it farmland that produces food? Nope, let's stop all that. Let's now put solar panels on that can only produce a certain amount of power during the peak. And wait, you have to have a concurrent battery farm. So that's another few hundred acres that goes along with it. And we already said earlier, the technology doesn't exist around it. You go to some states where the data must be exchanged, where these immovable objects, internet exchanges sit, and you have to network within a certain latency metric to that. And if that area has no wind, well, then wind's not an option, right? You can get wind from afar and there is loss, but then you start to have the grid issues, the same thing that come along with it. The immovable fact that, as clean as we all want to be, is that there will be carbon burned to create energy to be able to support not just data centers, but the growth of the country. Forget coal's all being churned down. They're being shut down as fast as we can go. Diablo Canyon out in California, the nuclear reactor, they were, everybody's protesting. They didn't want any nukes in California. Then they realized that their lights would go out. And all of a sudden now they're like, well, we're going to extend the life of Diablo Canyon much longer. And it's got Indian history around it. There's a lot of baggage around that plant beyond it all. And it's an older plant. So older plants are older technology which have the correlated risks to go along with it. So it's a tough pickle. So that what is carbon? That's going to be the reality of it. If you told me today I'm going to put a gas turbine in place, a combined cycle gas turbine, 500 megawatt GE 8X turbine, roughly 500 megawatts, which has, unfortunately, you can estimate 8 to 10% downtime every year for maintenance. That turbine today can burn 50% hydrogen. But the hydrogen economy is gobbledygook. Doesn't make any sense. Even with the incentives, it would cost 19 cents a kilowatt hour because if you took gray hydrogen, cracked it from natural gas, which is the mandate with the hydrogen hubs that were approved, some of them, and then you had to use electricity to crack the natural gas to create the hydrogen, or you can do steam methane reforming to do that. And then you have to have a new pipeline to deliver it because the same pipelines can't use it. It doesn't work the same way. It's different pressures, different everything. If you want to store it, you have to supercool it. That takes energy to then store that liquid hydrogen. And so it gets nuts. If you want to use hydrogen just as a backup, that's 31 cents a kilowatt hour. The numbers go crazy. So then if you said, I want to use renewable natural gas, how do you create that? Well, that's going to be from pig farms, from animal waste, or cattle farms. And we have some of those pen areas in West Texas, things like that. Or is it a garbage dump? So it's poo or poo, because you're dealing with we talk about poo a lot on this today. It's a poo day. It's going to be poopy diapers in a landfill, but that makes methane, which is really not good for burning. It's stinky to top it off. So you have to clean up that methane to get it to become pipeline ready gas. And the volume of natural gas that you can get from a landfill, from multiple landfills, would not be able to accommodate combined cycle 500 megawatt GE at 8X turbines. Remember, 8 to 10% downtime a year. So you can't just have one, you have to have two. But then that's that's only 500 megawatts and 500 megawatts, but let's say I need 4 gigawatts. Well, how many more turbines do I do? Where is that gas going to come from? Landfill's impossible. Hydrogen doesn't make any financial sense and doesn't exist.
I don't think there are solutions yet either. I think that
there is. It's a pipeline. It's going to take we're one of the biggest producers of natural gas in the world. Right here in Texas, we produce tons. Up in Pennsylvania and shale, they produce tons.
You think that'll be the solution?
It'll be the interim solution. Remember what I said when I started this? So you have peak out on the grid. You have a lot of coal plants, other things being turned down. Now, what does the grid consist of? It consists of hydro. That's great, but there'll be no new hydro in this country. No chance. They're even taking hydro dams down.
Why is that? I've heard that before. Why are they? Is it just end of life?
They've already maximized what can be developed, and they're even taking them down because of salmon spawning and things like that. That makes more sense. So they're actually that's really disappearing. You have pumped hydro. That's where you go up on a mountaintop. You have a lake. And then when you need backup, it's like the biggest more batteries in this country are using that than anything else. When you pump the water up to this lake, and when you have an outage, like think about it like a battery,
let gravity
you drop it down, it spins turbines.
Yep.
Just like you hear turbines a lot. Turbines have a lot of different flavors. And then it fills into another basin. And then when you don't need it as a battery, when the electricity is working again, you pump it back up, and then your battery's restored. It's mostly used as batteries, not as true generation or production. You have coal. Now, we all know coal is going the way of the dodo in this country. It is accelerating in China and India and Asia. Accelerating.
The places where we have the greatest forms of pollution in the world, you mean?
Massive pollution. And guess what? The wind currents carried around the world where it is, and they're like, we're not stopping because our economies are, especially India, they're developing. They're not going to stop. Southeast Asia in particular. So
I think unless there's a disruptor of an industry, I think there needs to be, like, think of this.
We'll get to that though. I'll get to the hype around disrupting, right? So let me go through these things. So you got coal, which is going the way of the dodo in this country. You've got combined cycle gas turbines making the majority of the electricity in this country, just of sustained 24/7 electricity. Combined cycle, very efficient. They're burning natural gas, right? That's what they're doing. You've got renewable natural gas is injected into the same pipeline, just like if you bought solar or things like that, they're injected into the grid. It's injected in the same pipeline, unless you're directly on or next to the landfill and using that, but it's still not enough to burn.
It's a rate table. You're buying a PPA.
Yeah. And like a sewage treatment plant has waste gases. You can maybe make 4 megawatts for a plant that would serve the city of Dallas. That it just doesn't make a lot, so that's it. Now we have 10% of our electricity in this country is covered by nuclear reactors, and that's pretty static.
What was that number you said?
10%.
Yeah, that's
10%. And that's it. And the only new reactor in the last 18 years is the Vogtle reactor, and it still hasn't even started up, and it was $34 billion, massively over budget.
I thought they reconverted that plant back to a coal plant, or wherever they built that reactor plant at.
No, where Vogtle was an existing reactor.
Okay.
I think they were Westinghouse previous gen reactors. And then now there are these new, I think it's called a BRW 1000. I forgot they all have different names, but it's 1,000 megawatts each. Very small stack, doesn't have the usual, sorry about that, it doesn't have the usual, big cooling tower that comes up. It's much smaller, much more condensed, much less parts, much safer in its design, much more automated in its resiliency and backup systems. But I think it's great, but that's it. And then we've reached this inflection point where the amount of potential generation around the country with solar and wind, particularly out west in the deserts and things like that, West Texas, where places where there's a lot of wind flow, are massive, but they have a life cycle too. You don't just put up a wind turbine, and a 1 megawatt wind turbine, let's say, which 1 to 3 megawatts, kind of the standard range of designs. They degrade. The turbine itself does. It needs maintenance. The blades, they have no way to dispose of them. They bury them. So
really?
There's an eco waste cycle that goes along with it. It's not all perfectly green, and it's not, you don't build a turbine and say, 20 years later, worry about it. I don't even know the lifetime. It depends on everything, but there's issues around them. They're made out of fiberglass, and they what do you do with them? There's not much use. I think one little company is starting to recycle a little, but it's not good. Solar panels, they're, the moment you put it in, just like the moment you bought a phone or a laptop, it's outdated. The moment you put it in, because newer technology, newer densification of the panel itself are coming in. So the solar panel waste is massive. There is no such thing as clean energy. They all have baggage. So now, if you look at the reality of our situation in this country, the stopgap for 24/7 power is going to be a massive uptick of natural gas turbines across this country with incredible emissions hardware on them that will raise the cost per kilowatt produced, but will make them very clean. If you look at backup, we talk about backup in data centers all the time. And why do we even have it? It's the engineering warm blanket.
Yeah.
And that's a quote from a hyperscaler. So we have to have this warm blanket because no engineer wants to be the guy who gets fired because he said, we don't need generators there. The grid's good. They're never going to say that. And I'm the only person I know who's actually, and my colleagues at the time, who experienced a month of outage at a data center. And that was Napa the Americas. And that was because Yeah, one of the biggest. It was the biggest data center in the world. Still at that time. I think a bigger one might have been built in Japan just around this. But in 2005, 3 hurricanes hit in 1 month in Miami. And the grid was so jacked up and it's such dirty sine wave feeds from it that everything was shut off and we were just running on gens. We had to.
Gotcha.
So it was out. We weren't out, but we were running on gens. When we talk about emergency generators, they run 8 hours a year for testing. They burn diesel, right? You have tier 4, which make them quite clean, and especially non-attainment areas to control your emissions. People modify tier 2 gens to be tier 4 compliant, things like that. You have HVO, hydrogenated vegetable oil, as an alternative backup fuel, right? It is chemically identical to diesel once it's refined. It's produced from soybean or switchgrass or all these different things. Very few refineries on the East Coast. I think there's only one in Nova Scotia right now. A lot in the Midwest, most of it out west in California producing this. So you're refining vegetable material, which has its own inherent carbon sink. However, its emissions are exactly the same. Exactly, because it's chemically identical. It's known if you get a carbon credit because it's got its own natural carbon sink, okay, but it's still the same thing. So then the next alternative would be things like Enchanted Rock or Wasilla or all these different engines that run on natural gas again, which is prevalent and all over this country. The good thing about those, these are piston engines, not turbines now. Just for emergency backup, they have 9% of the emissions of diesel. They're more expensive. The maintenance is harder on them. There's flaws to them, but that's another option that does exist out there.